better? Is that better? I think that's better. Okay. So yesterday, sorry about that, forgot. I did a page during the stream where I just started just drawing, just going to town, showing different versions of drawing the same scene, positive, negative elements, right? Things like that. And using shapes to define the composition, using dark lines on white surface, using light lines on dark surface. Just different ways of interpreting things. And I looked in the book and I saw somebody had made a suggestion about, is this real? Which was a really open-ended suggestion. It's the kind of thing that you can pretty much do anything with. But Lori and I have been watching The Man in the High Castle. So I immediately thought, all these different versions of reality coupled with the writer of The Man in the High Castle, Philip K. Dick. So I started drawing over top of the already existing drawings that I had. And so here we have this montaged page. Better. And so there's the illustrated page, and there's the finished image. Oh, Linda's at the doctor. Linda, I hope everything's okay. Hiya, Linda. Welcome on board. Hiya, Tim. I hope that everything is okay and going to work out okay. But thanks for checking in. Your inner thoughts and prayers here. So, where am I? Here I am. There we go. So that's what this is the finished composition where I add in the textural elements. And then a couple little bits of business like the strange, I don't know what color that is. The gray, it's a gray tone type thing because I used the color picker and I just picked up from the ballpoint pen. And the ballpoint pen is supposed to be black, so so there's today's page, and good fun, lots of fun to do. But one of the things about doing stuff like this, I wanted to show, make a note of something here. I got some scrap paper, and here it is. Well, we got notes on this or something. Well, let's not use that side. Okay. So here is our scrap paper. Now, I'm going to put it up on the screen. Bingo. Now, a lot of times I'll show, and I'll do this in both formats, if that helps folks out. So just give me 1 second. I forgot to turn a light on. And I get to have a drink of water while I'm going to do it. Much better. Right, Corbin? Corbin's having a nap on the floor beside me. So, okay, 2 formats. Portrait, Big P, and landscape, Big L. Now, the thing with these formats is that if you're telling sequential stories in them, I've shown this numerous times, you can move the eye of the viewer back and forth across the page. Lucy, what are you doing? What is she doing? Keep an eye on her. And the same thing applies to the landscape format. You want to move the eye back and forth across the page from the top left to the bottom right. And so with that in mind, you still have this progression of elements. Now, a lot of people will break their pages up into various panel shapes, right? Here's a long one, there's one like this, and as people get more and more complex about this, instead of just holding on to these rigid, solid square panel forms, or rectangular panel forms, they start to experiment, and they start to do things like, here's a picture's head, a person's head, the character's head talking. There's the next panel, but for the panel down below that, they will cut across inside of these 2 first level panels, and the next panel starts behind it, basically. And then you've got your next panel will be cut out, with a little bit of a black border around it. Or you'll see things like that black border will fade into the composition down below, so that it's, again, incorporating the two spaces together. So the complexity of the panels become more and more, right? And then the extremity of that is where you've gone from. So I call this open, right? And I call this rigid. People have a million different names. This professional term. But the other, approach to this is to look at it as free form. And so free form is where you can also call it montage, which is why in the title for today's video I said, montaging your elements. So this is where you've got panels, but if you take a look over here, this panel breaks into the next one, right? This panel breaks into the border around this one. So as you're drawing your different elements, this panel laps in behind this. This panel goes right up to the edge of that one. This are blended pretty solidly together. So you start breaking through those boundaries and those walls, and allowing the images to work one into the next one. So if you've got, let's say, we'll put, floating guy here, and so here's our guy. Let's say it's a crime scene. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, dun. Anyways, so here's the crime scene, and so we've got our alley scene. Here's a garbage pail in the background, some heaps of garbage, and we can even, be interesting and put some police tape across here. Let's say, police line, do not cross, blah blah blah. Okay, so that cuts across our page, but you've got, the heads of your two guys here looking down at the body, standing side by side. So now they're directed into this panel, right? These two dudes looking down towards the let me zoom in. Come on. Here we are. So you've got your rigid square or rectangular forms. You've got your open ones where you're blending different shapes together but moving the viewer's eye through accordingly. And then your free form is where you've got the montage elements like so, where one image is bleeding into the next one. Okay? So with that, if this is your person lying in an alleyway and these are your two police officers that are overseeing them, if you take this panel without any border around it and have the viewer's eyes directed down, looking down to the person on the ground, that it works so that honestly they're probably standing over here in the scene itself. But by having their eyes directed to that first subject, that sort of embeds the two images together, even though the one thing is floating within the frame of the other. And then you can have fun and cut the next panel underneath this one. But if the alleyway, let's say, is bleeding out and it moves right into the side of one of these buildings that are crossing over the alley, and there's your person in the thing, and there's your two people standing, it all sort of runs one element into the next, and it fuses the whole page together. And so this is why I call this the freeform. You can also call this montage, right? Because you're montaging elements one over top of the other. With a project that you're doing for any given story, I think it's important that you find your comfort in what you enjoy. And if you're feeling in a really, solid place where you have to plan stuff out, you need to have a definable structure of panel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Then the rigid one's probably the one for you. If you've been doing these for a while and you're bored, right? So start opening it up. Start looking at, if you're looking at ways to tell stories in a sequential manner, then do that. Explore it. Hi, Linda, or hi, Liz. Sorry, she says hi, Chris. Hi, Linda. Um, hi, Liz. Hi, Laszlo. Liz had her phone broken yesterday, so she's using her partner's phone. This might be the way that you want to direct yourself. And if you look at examples of storytelling techniques that people use, and you recognize that maybe they're defying expected form, like let's look at it from film. Editing says, here's this shot, and then for this scene, and then we move over to a different location shot for the next scene where that takes place and those characters therein. And so the viewer has to be able to understand that jump from London to Paris. Okay. One way that people would, break that would by having a momentary black screen, just as it's, maybe with an airplane sound dubbed over top of it or something. But or the dialogue starts going, so here we are on our way to Rhode Island, and then here next shot it's got people jiggling around on a train as they're traveling from New York to Schenectady or Rhode Island, whatever, I don't know. So how you doing, Malcolm? Welcome aboard. So there's different ways that you can do those shots. Star Wars, the Star Wars films, if you look back on those, they do something, it's called a wipe shot. It's literally where basically the next shot sort of wipes into the screen, and the previous scene is covered up. It's really interesting to think that there's that different transition, but even in film, there's different elements of how we tell from the different sequence events and how they take place. And of course, all those techniques carry over to television, all those techniques carry over to animation. So, and again, these are other sequential applications, right? There's a fun thing that you can see, and this works along when you're doing two-dimensional paintings or drawings on a wall or something. And you've got so the expectation, of course, is you've got let's say in your exhibition, you've got 3 pieces that are all the same, 4 pieces all the same size on a wall, okay? And so each of these images are one of them, each and of themselves, right? So, which is expected. But what if you defy that form there and you take the rigid application of A, B, C, D pieces, and whatever the subject matter is, doesn't matter. But you figure out a way to transpose one element from across each of these compositions. Now, whether it's somebody jumping all the way across, you've got different poses where you've got person who's leaping here, who's up in the air in the next one, and who's fully flying across in the next one, and then landing on the ground in the last. And you throw those 4 different, movement, like those 4 different actions of a movement across the 4 paintings. And maybe you want to hide them in little small elements down in the corner or something like that. And have the rest of the composition be as it is, but just have this, connect them as thematically, that the 4 of them are interconnected by having this one continuous element. I mean, there's things like that we can do to break that sort of standardized form. Or you could even be so, brazen as to take the same idea and pick one of these poses, so that here's the foot and comes through into the leg. There's the calf of the next leg and one of the arms, and then you've got arms into the shoulder, and there's the head, a piece of that knee, and then in the last panel you've got the hand moving across. And so you've taken the same action of a character and moved it across that space. Now, in a sequential story, each of these different panels, each of these different framing elements shows the transposition of time. And the way that we use that is, if in a conversation you've got Bob, yes, Bill, I've got something to tell you, Bob. Well, just spit it out already. So you could show 4 different panels for that transposition of time. But in the course of that, you can still do some sort of thing that defies that expectation. And this follows suit into what I'm telling you here about trying different approaches to your panels. But in the case of that rigid application of those 4 panels of Bob and Bill, in having this conversation, you can do something else that breaks away from that form. Like you can have somebody in the background, and in the next panel they're a step closer, and in the next panel they're a step closer again, and in the last panel their face is right between the 2 of them. And so you have a 5th panel where you've got the 3 characters together, and they're both pushing the 3rd character, get out of the way. There's no point to it. It's nonsense, but it's fun. And it's sort of, well, why did that happen? How does that go on? Well, it's just an element I wanted to add in. It's just something that I thought would be funny, is having the oblivious 3rd person who walks right into the center of the conversation, goes, hey, what's up, guys? Get out of the way. We're trying to talk. The whole page is a build of expectation for the reader for these, this whatever the important thing that these 2 guys are going to talk about, only to be interrupted at the end by this 3rd character is something that happens so very common in conversations in the world we live in. So, but if you were to apply that, I mean, that's taking the rigid form and trying to work within the confines of it, but to do so in an interesting way. In an open form, you could have the same sort of thing, wherein in the open form, like so, you've got the panel interaction, ... But you can have some sort of scenario where here's a person hiding behind this panel, and then they stand out from behind it, and then the next panel here is them climbing down the page, and then the final panel is them hanging at the bottom. And those actions take place despite whatever the conversation is that's going on the page. So, I mean, now it's the same sort of application, but you've broken it up so they're not stuck rigidly inside those panels. In a montage free form, this is where you'll see scenarios where somebody is just running straight through the center of the page, and they get stuck here, and so the next panel, but this is the fun part, or something that montage is that it doesn't have to hold it into any sort of rigid logistical form. So by that last one, where we've cut, here's our crime scene, this is all still the same. There's the body, there's the detectives, there's the wider shot of the crime scene itself. Here's the tape going across, but that second narrative is happening here where we've got somebody running on top of the composition who hits the police tape, and then now he's got the police tape across him and causing big disruption, so that it's throwing him off his step. And our next panel or our next page can have him wiping out in the alleyway right beside the body or whatever it is, and the 2 detectives go, what are you doing? Why are you here? And because it's all these montage together elements, there's a sort of a subversive expectation that you don't have to stay to any sort of rigid structure. And that goes for the visual elements, but it can also go for it opens up the whole story. So freeform just allows you to really experiment with ideas. Liz says it would be fun to have an animal represent part of the signature. Which signature is that, Liz? An animal. Oh, do you mean like using an animal element across the panels or across the composition? Why not? Loisel, I think it is, Loisel, is a French writer-illustrator that did an adaptation of Peter Pan, and there's an absolutely fantastic sequence of events that happens when if you know Peter Pan, there's a crocodile that is constantly chasing after Captain Hook. And the reason that the crocodile is chasing after Captain Hook is because during an early skirmish between the protagonist, the antagonist, Peter Pan versus Captain Hook, Hook lost his hand, and it was fed to this giant crocodile that stalks the island, the magical island. And so now it has a taste for Hook, and it wants to eat him. But at some point in the course of adventures, they manage to get a working, continue to be working clock into the crocodile's belly. So when you hear the tick tock sound, you know the crocodile's nearby. So Hook can gain the safety. Children's logic, right? But it's a fun little notion. But in Lozel's comic, you can see some beautiful panel exchanges where, as these different scenarios are going on, where Hook is berating Smee, his assistant on the boat. Smee, you never listen to me, Smee. And as that's happening, we hear this little tick tock as there's ripples on the water coming towards their boat. And the next panel, tick tock, is a little bit louder and the ripples are a little larger. And do you hear that, Captain? What? Smee, listen to me when I'm talking to you. It's to the point where, boom, crocodile's right beside the boat. Wah! That building of suspense is there. So there's a lot of fun things that can be done. There's some really beautiful pages, and there's some really beautiful applications where people use free-form techniques. Now, some of the places that you see really good examples of those would be, Jamie Hewlett does some fun things. A lot of the old punk rocky comics of the 1970s, 80s, particularly a lot of the British ones would do that. They would open up the page structure and overlap elements, and you can get some really cool things. In Western comics, it's largely applied for, let's say, like a person who can read minds. Here's this montage of elements all around their mind. Oh, like this. And they got the temples and then you see vignettes of all of these scenes that have happened and all of these thoughts of these characters all blending together, of one character and multiple characters, whatever it is. And that sort of montage of elements, whether it's in a framing structure or not, is a common way you see it used in the Western comics. Just seeing a fun collage with dog heads, which I thought would be fun to make, and team, group, or employee or company collage. Just need a class to work or worksite names. Well, just pick anything out of a hat, really. You can do all kinds of fun stuff with that. That's for sure. But there's another example of fun applications of putting together some elements. Like if you take an old class photograph of all the people going, at the end of the year picture, a thing in your books is underneath there's a quote of the student, or, because they're graduating and, their favorite class was this, and, the best, the kid best known to run through the halls, whatever. But you can either omit that stuff, like cover over it, or you can paste up something over top of it and have dialogue coming out of these people's heads. And, take the format of it and break it so that you just copy a lot of those images, and so that you can repetitively use them, so that you can have characters now having conversations, but in that rigid yearbook style format or something like that. Or you can just have, there's a funny thing with, I'm thinking of what it's called. Is it Big Numbers, or is it, I'm trying to think if it's a Big Numbers or an Electra, where one of the bad guys has always got this face, like it's just this politician image, and so it's a paste up. It's the same face repeated over and over and over again. So every time you see this character in a scene, they're always the same political face. And I love that. I love that, so that you can have breaking of panels and breaking of with the actions that are going on the page, but at the same time, you're breaking a character form by having that character have one facial expression, one appearance, and it sort of sets a tone. This is what this character represents. This is, if they're always smiling, and even if it's saying terrible things, or if they're scared or whatever, and they're still going same face, it represents something about that character that's defies the logic of characters having personality and flaws and more fully rounded development. Bad characters don't, but in this context, I'm sorry, they've taken it to the extent that the character has no visual aesthetic differentiation really from one image of themselves to the next. It's all a veneer, it's all a fake tableau expression, but at the same time, there tons of character development can be written into that, right? Isn't there a guy who only draws penguins and has become very famous for his paintings, all just the same different seams? Alpha is huge for that reason. I'm not familiar with who that creator might be. I know that if you look at early Mad magazines, this is, flying off again to something else, but if you look at early Mad magazine pages, and it doesn't matter what it is, if it's a 2-page spread of the lighter side of Mad Max, and here's your comic about of them telling what happens in the film Mad Max, or here's the joke pages, of the mom and the dad and all that sort of stuff, and they're chatting about, oh honey, our little girl's going to her graduating dance. Well, young Wilkins boy better take care of her, there'll be trouble. While all of this is going on the page, Sergio Aragonés would draw these little scenes where somebody's chasing after a chariot being pulled by a runaway horse or something. And it has nothing to do with the story that's going on the page. And apparently, from my understanding, is when he would do inking on other people's pages, he would get momentarily, bored, or his mind would wander or something like that. And so he would scribble in the top gutters and corners of the page, and when they saw that at the Mad in William Gaines guys in the Mad offices, and they saw those scribbles and doodles, and they're like, these are hilarious. We're leaving them in. So the expectation was that they would be omitted off the page as the page was to go to print. But here you got all these pages with crazy Sergio Aragonés illustrations of a guy going down a rope down the side of the page, and then as you're reading through the story, and then you realize this guy's been going down this rope the whole time, and then you see him with his legs kicking and dangling, and about 2 inches down, or an inch down below that is a shark sticking its head out of water, and so it's just another joke. It's just another joke fit on the same page. It just doesn't have to necessarily have anything to do with the other thing. That's a montage of various elements in the same composition. I grew up on Rupert, and Rupert would tell the story like this. Okay, so Rupert would say, here is one of the characters, maybe Rupert, and here is the villain over here on this side. Here's the title, right? So you've got your 2 characters, you got the title, and then you've got your 4 squares. Okay, now in those squares, very seldomly you'd have somebody say, oh no, or something like that in a word balloon. But you would have the visual actions going on here, and the different scenes of the story happening there, okay? And underneath that would be the text corresponding to each of those panels. Okay? And so you can now read. So here's your protagonist, and maybe your antagonist, or another one of the existing characters that's in the structural narrative of that page. So there's Rupert and his friend Bill, or there's Rupert and the evil emperor. And or here's Rupert running, and here's Bill also running with a little tiny kite in distance. And then the page is about Rupert and Bill going to fly a kite, and the wind catches the kite and takes it away, and the two boys are running over the hillside. And they end up in a magical land. Okay. But so you've got all these different versions of the same story now. You've got the, we're just looking at the incredibly short synopsis of here's these two characters having an adventure. And then you've got the visual element as a second story. Then you've got the textual element, how that corresponds to the visual. So there's a third version of it. And then on top of that, Rupert would have prose down here at the bottom. It would be describing the same story again. And so you have all of these different ways that you can read the same page. And the beautiful thing about this is that it's different ages of reading. It's just different points of development about a young person reading a story. So who's that up there? Oh, that's Rupert. And Bill's got a kite, and they're trying to get the kite. Okay, so little person has understood that story. But now they're a little bit older, so now they're reading. There's Rupert waving at Bill. Here's Bill showing his new kite. Here the two of them have put it up in the air. And oh no, the wind has got it. And they've read that visually. Okay, again, they get a little bit older, and now they can read the story that goes along with each of these. Hiya, Bill, said Rupert. Hiya, Rupert, said Bill. What's that you've got there? It's my new kite. You hold it still, and I'll run ahead with it and throw it up in the air. Oh no, the wind's got it. So now you've got that level of complexity to the story, so the young reader has developed the ability to apply the text. So then what do we do here? We've got all of those things, but as the little boy gets a little bit older, he wants to develop that, his reading skills more, but he really loves Rupert. Well, now he's able to read this. Little boy or girl, you know what I mean. But so now they're able to read this part, and they get this full rounded sense of the whole of the story. Let me see if I can find one of my Rupert books here. Because as an adult, actively sought out some Rupert. You don't want to lose. Sometimes you want to be able to touch back to those things that you appreciated so much when you were younger. What are the chances I can find it easily? Not very. Oh well. Well, you get the idea anyways. I gotta get a better system. Yeah, I definitely need to develop a different system in my studio. Yeah, so anyways, I can't locate it easily. Your watch is probably right in front of me. Yeah, it's right in front of me. Here's the shelf with the Ruperts on it, directly at my feet. Okay, so this is Rupert, the Rupert Annual. I'll pull out for this. Is that as far as we go? Okay, I guess it is. So here's the Rupert Annual. So each of these stories this is exactly how I described it. Here's Mother saying, Rupert, go to bed. Okay, Mom. So here's Rupert in bed, dreaming. Here's the adventure he's going on. The water's real. My bed's afloat, exactly like a little boat. Right? An island, Rupert grasped, but how? I'm drifting straight towards it now. There's the island. There's Rupert drifting towards it in bed. The rocky island looks quite bare. I don't think anybody's there. So here's a big view of the island. No people on it. There's the boat coming in. And then the boat lands ashore. There's all these, or the boat, all these other beds around the side, along the beach there. And he says, but as he lands, Rupert sees more beds grounded on the sandy shore. So now you've got this level of sophistication. And then there it comes. There's the pure text part. So, I mean, this is a whole separate approach to something. This is like this multi-layered montaging of textual and visual story elements, and doing so in an interesting enough a way that it just allows further and further development of the same story ideas. That's what I grew up reading. That's the earliest thing I can think of reading when I was a kid. And it's stuff like that that really stays with you. I'll show this again. This is something that I picked up in the last so many years. This is Mr. Invincible. And I cannot pronounce Pascal Wazeline. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, and I apologize. What's incredible about Mr. Invincible, is that this again takes a rigid form and defies expectation of it. He understands that he's in a comic. Okay, so the character, Mr. Invincible, the one and only true comic book superhero, he's going in the fridge for milk. He looks down into this panel from above. Panel 3, he jumps down into panel 6. So, but if we still follow the panel-to-panel narrative, oh no, a dark alley, Mom says. Quick, let's get out of here before... Give us your money, lady. This is exactly what he noticed in panel 2. Panel 6, Mr. Invincible to the rescue, and he jumps on the bad guy. Knocks him to the ground. What? And he stands there, panel 7, so we've gone back to the expectation of the form. Leave the widow and orphan alone, you troublemaker. Or what, Cape? I've got a gun. Ha ha ha. And he's, indeed. Bad guy's knocked out. Let's see if we can get a little closer. Come on. So bad guy's knocked out here. Okay, so here's our, what's that down there? Sight line for the eye. Then jump line, right? So now here we are. Return to form. Indeed, bad guy's knocked out. But what the... Where did that? And as he walks over towards him, he picks up his gun. I don't get it. It's just the incredible magic of comics, man. Excuse me a moment. Pow! That's the shot that knocked the guy out. And then pow, the second shot. Magic of comics. Oh, pow! He breaks the gun that he's holding in his hand in that panel, in the 9th or the 12th panel. Yoink! Well, whatever you did, you saved us. Thank you, Mr. Invincible, and thanks, comic book magic. You're welcome. That's genius. And the whole book is this. It plays with actions where he's helping himself do things. It plays with scale. Here's a cat in a tree. He reaches down from the panel above to get the cat, hands it to her. But wait, what? She sees another cat up there. Now there's 2. Oh, no, there's just 1. Goes off. The whole, I mean, it gets more and more complex as it goes through the book. And, I mean, here he is dropping an anchor on the boat he's in. You know, just silly, crazy, fun stuff. But absolutely brilliant. So some of the other characters that are in it, here's a guy who doesn't understand scale. The tree is being lifted off the ground. Okay, fall back. And then plants it in the ground again, because this guy, his perspective, the tree is in the distance. I'm sorry. His perspective is that he can pick up the tree in the distance and place it where it needs to be. And he pushes the telephone post back up. Okay. But from their perspective, it's magically being lifted out of the ground, or lifted off the ground and being stuck somewhere. You know, it's just logic defying, you know. And then you've got a character who changes the color of things. You've got, here's a fun thing. The book isn't ripped, and yet here's this serration in like this page. And as the bad guy is tackled, he sprays the page, right? And the page dissolves. So as we go through the story and we realize, up there, a black hole. It's the panel on the next page. But as we flip the page in the book, here's this guy screaming because suddenly it's a giant squirrel in the shot. But that again, previous page. Wow! Wait, what was that? Like, I mean, that's just bonkers. This exchange is absolutely bonkers. And then we've got, oh boy, and he says, Mr. Invincible, hello, say something. It's okay, Judy, don't worry. That happened on the previous page. Right? So when we were first introduced to Mr. Invisible, it's okay, don't worry. So he says, oh boy, I was so scared. I'm glad you're okay. I'll see you. I'll be right there. What? Oh yeah. So now we've got our characters together again. It's genius. This is genius level stuff of defying expectation, defying those conventions. And then here's the character that can walk through space. And unlike Mr. Invincible, who can move from panel to panel, this guy can move through the space. And so what that means is, if you see on this page, come here, you brat. On that page, there he is coming through. So as you're reading this story, and you've got, wow, oh, my little Albert, he sure loves to shout. Right up here. So, oh, my little Albert, he sure loves to shout. Wah, perfect, right? If we flip this page over in the story, as the story develops, there he is sticking his head through the wall. So, you know, while this isn't necessarily a montaging of elements within a composition on a page, what it is it's a montaging of story elements throughout, you know, the composition itself. So, you know, allow the, I want you to think beyond just the physical visual aspect and think as well about the story placement aspect. You know, you can have a character go, I'm going to leave this here for later. And they put it in a box and they close the lid on the box. And then the story continues on. And the person says, I've got the drop on you, Bill. Now give us all the dough. And the other guy goes, sure, I keep it in this box. And he pulls his blamer and goes, you know, ha ha ha, I knew to put it aside for when I needed it. You can do things like that. It's the same conceit, right? So, okay, let's go back to this. So now, initially I talked about how the freeform aspect of the page is where we can, there we go, is where we can tell all these different story elements in this sort of a montage way where the visual elements overlap one another. Yesterday I was talking about how you can take different ways of interpreting the same scene, right? And apply those to your storytelling so that, you know, all of these have equal merit. But in this case of just having them all composited together on the same page is an example of alternate worlds, alternate realities. That's just how it fits in with this Philip K. Dick narrative. So, you know, it just sort of plays with the idea of traveling in and out. And if you want to get into symbolic language, having this transposition of elements of Philip K. Dick is in and over top of this panel. This panel bleeds in and over top of that one. This bleeds in and over top of that. This bleeds over in and on top of this. You know, this picture of Philip bleeds over top of that one and that one. This picture of him, you know, moves into this space and down through that space, you know, below. So the idea of moving in and out of realities or in and out of space, you know, I sort of exposit that idea by putting this visual collusion, the images of him overlapping with the images of the alternate ways of looking at the same scenes. So hopefully, symbolically, somebody looks at it and goes, oh, yeah, I get it. Hey, Marsh, how you doing? Well, all is well in Ransom in town. Oh, yeah, it definitely is. We got a new kitten. She's running around here someplace. Corbin is sleeping in his chair. Yeah, we have a new kitten named Lucy. She looks exactly like Corbin, but she's smaller and crazy. I hope everything's well with you, Marge. New baby. So yeah, so there's a whole bunch of elements. So I'll look in the book for today. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about freeform montage, and how we can crash together all these different visual pieces in with story pieces. Oftentimes you'll see in, let's say, in North America, we have Flash, the character of the Flash, who can run faster, than the wind, faster than the Dickens. And oftentimes you'll see him, they draw him with phasic representations of his arm as he reaches out, like his arm reaches up and grabs a bullet out of the air and then has it in his hand, when his hand is in a static position, like, so it's not this blurred movement. But by drawing all of these multiple iterations of the arm, the idea of that is to try to make the reader understand that if this is the panel, if this is the panel, and here's our guy, and you see his arm here, and then you see his arm open up like so, and then you see his arm grab a hold of the bullet in space. The idea to get across is, because we understand that panel to panel to panel is moment to moment to moment, by having 3 different actions in the singular panel, is that it goes whip, whip, whip. It's all these quick movements, these quick moments within the moment, right? So it's a montaging of these elements within this piece of composition in order to manipulate our understanding of time in the story. So there's so many different ways that we can use this, beyond just, the whole, alliteration of the idea of, here's the different scenarios, but here's the moving in and out of them part. That's far more, I won't say acerbic, it's probably the wrong word, but it's probably more in accordance to your thoughts than it is something that's in according to your vision, where you see the actual multiple movements, right? Liz says, I was thinking of overlaying cutout squares to divvy up one large picture, which would work for cutting away and repositioning into the other panels. Excellent. Liz says, these are things I've never even knew to try. Well, I mean, when we understand the basics of a thing, when we understand the early meat and potatoes of, here's your page, what's an easy way to lay this out to move the image along, is by representing spaces to denote actions in time. So if we look at our page now, we want the eye to move this way, okay, so that it goes across there, goes down, across there, goes down, across there. It's the same thing. But each of these things, if you look at it, and sometimes it helps to physically actualize a thing. So if you look at each of these panels as and look at the page that way, so now we know we've got a rhythm of 9 actions. If you draw a larger panel, say, so that we've got this, and then this panel, and then this panel, and a smaller panel, and then we go back to this, okay? So now the rhythm for this one becomes it's the same tempo, it's the same time frame, but there's more involvement that's taken in those 2 moments. So which would ideally mean that there's something more important happening here and here that makes it warranted for us to apply a little bit of stretching of that time. So here's briefcase under the chair, the people are having lunch, they get up to, this one gets up to go, this new person sits down, somebody over the other table says it's bad, they start rushing across the room to grab the bomb that's under the chair, and the other person's wondering, why are you here? And he pushes him out of the way, looks under the table, bomb explodes. Or how about looks under the table, sees the bomb. And then we go back to the rhythm of him trying to reach to grab it, to, defuse it, and breathe. But the reason that these are wider is that he looks under the table and to see the bomb, and then there it is. So we stretch that little action, that little moment of our pacing, to bring more attention to the viewer to watch that, to look at those panels and realize there's something important that's just happened. When you've got books where, and this is a 90s convention, never been a big fan of it, but it's what it was, and it continues to affect the Western market today. I'm going to use this kid who got bit by a bug and now, swings around the city like a maniac. So if here's our character and he's swinging through the sky, okay? Here's a side. I don't know if you're familiar with objectivism or Ayn Rand, but she was about black and white. And Steve Ditko, one of the creator of Spider-Man, was an objectivist and it was an adherent to some of the theology of Ayn Rand. And so black is black, white is white. There's no in between. There's no gray area. You're either good, you're bad, because you made a conscious choice to be good or bad. And that action, well, there's factors involved. No, you made a choice. You're good or bad. That's objectivism. And so they did a comic book, Peter Baggy, who did Hate Magazine, an indie comic book about the grunge music scene in Seattle. He was allowed to do the megalomaniacal Spider-Man. It's a one-issue comic. But it's written as though Spider-Man is an objectivist. And so he spends the entire time wrestling with, if I step in and I save someone from being hurt, am I stealing their own agency away from them and not allowing them to save themselves? And why should I just assume that I'm the one that can go and do that just because I have all this power and strength? The whole book is that. It's fantastic, and it's absolutely ridiculous. But anyways, here's the guy, the spider guy, okay, swinging through the air. This is the thing that makes me a little bit crazy, is where the entire page is all these thought balloons about, I'm going to Toledo. I left my suitcase there. There was a girl I met with her once that I like. I hope she's still there. Yeah, well, I'm going to have to go down and check. But before that, I'm going to stop at work. And here it is now. Now, there's a transposition of time because you have to read balloon to balloon to balloon. So the balloons work as that rhythmic pattern we talked about, right? But it's one static image. And that one static image, so we're just meant to assume that this is happening and this person is just, oh my goodness, there's Toledo. I really want to go. I can't stop buying shoes. I sure do love wearing socks with them, but I also like wearing them with sandals. Nonsense. Just, so don't do that. Serving up great nuggets of fun. Storytelling is fun. So this has its merits. This has its benefit. Somebody's riding on a motorcycle and you want to show this open big shot of this cool action of guy on motorcycle with all of these text balloons as he's thinking about, I've traveled across the country in all these places and I've done and now I've got the bad guys in my sights and we're just about to catch up to their truck. I could see why you'd want to do that. It's a cool picture of him on a motorcycle. Story-wise, it's not as engaging for the reader. If the person just does not mind reading all these narrative elements and having a static image, okay, great, you got away with it. But the reality is that if you have multiple actions on that page, even if you just divide that page up, mind frame, yeah. Even if you just divide that page up in quarters, okay, and have him on his motorcycle, there's your close-up shot, there he is on his big old hog, there's the front light and the wheel, and ding, 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 there he is going down the highway. And then the next shot we've got, is him turning. So we open up the shot so we can see him in context, and as he's now moving this way. And then we cut the shot again so that we can see it from over his shoulder. We see him heading that way. That's more exciting and engaging to the reader than it is just doing one shot of them on their motorbike, 60 miles of text. Or as I call, the Brian Michael Bendis method. Bendis, as a writer, in the early days where he would do his books like Jinx and Torso and things like that, he would have this fantastic complexity of rhythmic pattern panels, where we'd have this great deal of dialogue on this page, but what you were invested in was the fact that so-and-so's looking at such and such in this very stern way. You're not hearing me, Bill. Now listen up. And so all of these momentary actions with all of this narrative device, you're not listening to me, Bill, and I'm sick of it. So listen up right now or you're not leaving this room. Like he's allowed to add this expanse of text, but those little actions carry us along in the emotional beats as well. So now you know what the emotional factor is to read the text. But now he's gotten into group shots of 23 people, and every one of them has a little balloon kicking out someplace or other. And they're all, I like the person over there wearing green sure looks neat. I wonder what his ability is. Does he shoot sticks? So it's hard. You give. He's a writer. But he's also able to illustrate. But he's so focused on the writing part, I think he's forgotten all the illustration stuff, because that's a lot of complexity to throw at an artist who's drawing tons of group shots. And the last so many books that he did for the last publisher that he worked for, you were less and less motivated, because the balance is off, and you can tell when the balance is off. And when you're trying to establish the dynamics, the rules yourself, you want to hold on to some degree of that balance. So Marsh says, what do you think of thought balloons in general? Are you glad they're mostly not in comics anymore? No! I think that thought balloons have as much equal merit as anything else. I think having somebody being able to break a wall and to have us be able to, thought bubbles, I get it. I get what you mean. You have two characters facing each other. It's a fantastic element to use, and why they don't have it in comics anymore, that's a stupid rule. Bob looks at Bill, and Bob says, "Oh, it's awfully great to see you, Bill." And then you see a little thought bubble above Bill's head, and he goes, "He doesn't mean that. It's great to see you too, Bob." Right? That little additional piece in that exchange of the thought bubble part that we read as the thought bubble, where he says, "I know he's lying," changes everything else from that point forward. Right? And why would you lose that? Why would you throw that away? What a waste, right? Because if the reader understands the level of sophistication in the language of what the balloon represents, big jagged balloon with heavy marks around the outsides, with text that's all in capitals, somebody's yelling. Bubbly balloon that comes, it doesn't come out of a spiky area to the head. It comes out of little bubbles to the top of their head, their mind. That's a thought. Hi, Bill, nice to see you. He doesn't mean that. Hi, Bob, nice to see you. Okay? Now, without the thought bubble, hi, Bill, nice to see you. Hi, Bob, nice to see you. It's waste. There's no reason that shouldn't be in there. Also, the whole narrative panel thing, the narrative panel debate that people have too about, Bob looked across the room at Bill, his nemesis, and knew he had to engage with him. Hi, Bob. Nice to see you. Hi, Bill. Nice to see you. And then you got your little caption at the bottom and says, neither of them believe that. As the narrative voice, we get to structure the framing of a scene differently, despite the fact of what's presented within the scene. It's the same thing as montaging elements, where you've got, but in this case, it's montaging story elements and layering one over top of the other in this regard, because now you've got Bob, nice to see you, Bill, nice to see you. Neither of them believe that. It works the same way as he didn't mean that in the thought bubble. So these people that want to throw that away, I don't understand them either. I mean, why would you, strip away the opportunity for furthering the interesting complexity that you can offer your reader. And why, as a reader, I don't understand as readers, but maybe it's because I'm old and I've been reading for a while. But why, as a reader, would you say, yeah, no, I want really basic, dumb stuff? I want it as simplified as possible after you've been reading for so long. I don't want that. I want something that has some degree of interesting development, interesting complexity. Somebody used soap operas one time as an example of repetitive, boring storytelling. And I disagreed with that because while it may at first seem, once you understand story beats and once you understand character arcs and once you understand, the heel turns and things like that can happen where somebody says they're doing a good thing and they turn out to be the bad guy. Once you understand those elements, yeah, it may seem boring to you, but the person who's invested in that story moment where, and even if they can sit to you and read off that such and such was married to such and such was married to that person, and then that person died, but then they came back, and so they married the other person, but then that person came back from the dead, and they came back in, and now it became a whole love triangle, and he went back with the first person that had previously died, and the second person married their brother, and now they've switched couples, But that sounds crazy. But in the moment, those turns in the story, those little twists and turns in the moments of the story are engaging to them. So the soap opera part of so-and-so's back from the dead? What? What's his ex-wife going to do? And, that's engaging to them. So why would you restrict the writers that they can't bring back people that previously died? Or why would you engage allow the writers to be disengaged from crazy antics in the story? Soap operas should be crazy, and they're the same. They are the same story platform as sequential comics. You can't have 1,000 issues of Batman without it being a soap opera. It's a soap opera, whether people want to admit it or not. It's no different than your mom watching The Young and the Restless. Well, that's so dumb. I gotta go pick up my new book of Batman. It's the same thing. It's just different character types and different story arcs and developments. Yeah, so I hope I know it's a brazen opinion to just I'm not so much that I'm objectively saying that people that disagree with whatever I'm suggesting is wrong, are wrong. I'm just wondering. It's like having a plate of food in front of you. Okay, I'm only going to eat this quadrant right here of my plate, and the rest of it, no. I disagree with the rest of it on a fundamental level. I'm only going to eat the peas, and I'm not going to eat the steak and potatoes. There's so many different things that can be done. Some people don't like broken panels. Okay, some people want rigid structure. Some people don't like open-faced pages. Some people hate montage or free-form things where, one flows into the next, into the next, into the next. No, I want it structured and rigid. That's fine. But there are books that present things in this way, or in this way, or in this way, or other. The one-page stories. I mean, this page here, this example alone is a breaking convention because the majority of North American sequential stories are in portrait format. And this story is drawn in landscape format. The reason that I like to work in landscape format is twofold. One, I've done enough of these, and I recognize that because I do things on my own, nobody's telling me I have to stick to this format. There's nothing wrong with the portrait format, nothing at all. This format works. And I work in it, all the time. I'll go back and do a portrait page all the time because I can, right? But there are still challenges that I'm wrestling with, and there are still interesting things that I haven't explored yet in this format. And so this is this landscape, this horizontal application as opposed to a vertical application. I see interesting things in it, and I want to explore those. Now, some people hate landscape format. I appreciate it. So my things are not the things for them. If that's what they're looking for, they're not going to look at these pages. But it's no different if you can just get those people to think for a second that when you open up a comic book in North America or in Europe, and there's an image that spreads across this page and this page, 2 pages. Every day I'm drawing in a 2-page spread. That's all this is. It's literally all it is. Because if you cut it in half, it's 2 portraits, right? I just use the real estate that I've got. Liz says, I always say I have enough of reality doing pages that run. Real is a break from the boring and usually evokes a feeling, which is what I'm going for. Yeah, I mean, if you can find a way and a means to reassess how it is you're doing things and to allow yourself that potential growth and development, do so. If you're uncomfortable with drawing with something because you're afraid of making a mistake, that's why I recommend that if you're worried about making a mistake on a page, the first thing you should do on a page is scribble on it. Just scribble on it, make a mess on it. Because you can incorporate said mess into your composition. The mess doesn't matter, right? The restriction does. So allow yourself to eliminate the restriction. Allow yourself to eliminate anything that inhibits you from having fun and playing. Like, I've got tape. This is masking tape that's stuck this page on. This drawing that I did during the stream yesterday. These little source images that I was using, I threw those in too. I don't care. This is a drawing imposing itself over another drawing. Well, yeah, but that doesn't look, well, that doesn't look perfect. That doesn't look perfect in one perspective. In another perspective, it works visually. But if we worry about what doesn't work or what other people are going to think or what the rules are, we're going to miss the thought bubbles. We're going to miss those other things. Marsh says, I agree. I think thought bubbles are fun. I could see the argument that it's weak writing to some extent, but I personally think it's charming and it adds to the comic reading experience. I don't think there's anything weak about thought bubbles. If you've got a character wrestling with the moral development that's at hand in a thought bubble, and if they're moving through the panel, if you've got a character that's walking around their kitchen, boiling water in a tea kettle, taking a tea bag out, putting it into a cup, the whistling of the tea kettle as they're pouring water in it, and then they go to sip it, and they go, yeah, right? You've got one layer of what's going on. Now, you do all of those same actions, right? I know that the bad guys are on this side of town, and as soon as I can just take a moment, just gather my wits and my resources, pours the water into the cup, right? As soon as I can gather my wits and resources, I'm sure I'll find them. Sips the tea. Yeah, that's not weak at all. That's not weak writing at all. That's adding an extra layer of complexity to a story. It's weak if you've got somebody, I'll punch them in the nose as they're punching him in the nose. It's weak if you've got, a scene where they're standing there, the knock, 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 the person opens the door, and the person on the other side of the door goes, hey, look, it's me, your nemesis, Bob. We should have been told that in a story already by whoever our character is, that, I hope I don't run across my nemesis Bob today. And the door opens up. Look, it's me. It's your nemesis Bob. Well, that's weak, right? Because that should be taken as rote. And if Bob is the nemesis, why is he just standing there announcing himself like that? That should be known. There's other ways and means of weakness, but I don't think thought bubbles are those. And I don't think word balloons and captions are. I mean, one of my favorite things from youth is, meanwhile at the Hall of Justice. It's the greatest, because that's an example of weak writing, by the way. Because every time it would say, meanwhile at the Hall of Justice, we see an image of the Hall of Justice. We know. We know we're at the Hall of Justice now. And the expectation is that we're in this moment at the Hall of Justice. So it's completely redundant to say that. That's weak. That's weak writing. And yet at the same time, it's charming. It's silly, but it's what it is. Yeah, it's what people do with possibilities. It's how we layer these elements. It's how we montage visual elements in a composition. It's how we montage textural elements into the visual composition. It's how we, if you've got, I've said this before, Bob is standing there at the fridge, okay? And he's got his hand on the handle. He does not need to say, I'm opening the fridge. Right? If Bob has got the fridge open and his head stuck inside and he's looking at whatever he's looking at in the fridge, and he says, I'm out of milk again. We don't have to show the inside of the fridge with no milk. Those elements are montaging or overlapping together to work in conjunction with one another. So if Bob is standing at the door to the fridge and he decides not to say out loud, because there's no one else in the room, I'm going to see what's in the fridge, blah, right? But if Bob is opening up, got his hand on the handle of the fridge, and he says, I hope there's milk in there. Then the next panel, when he's got his head stuck inside the fridge, he goes, dang! Well, we know why he said dang. Because in that first panel, we know he was looking for milk. So that thought bubble in the first panel, and then the outward expression in the second panel, adds more complexity to the story. Because now we've got what his intention, what his thoughts were, and that expiration of a word that that upset because it's not what followed through. Perfect. Because how many times have you done that? How many times have you got to make sure I don't hit my nail or hit my thumb with the hammer, right? And there's your and you're hammering, and and in your thought bubble, you're like, can't believe I just did that. You might not necessarily say that out loud, so why not have you think it out loud? So, play a lot. How about writing a short story where the two characters are saying one thing to each other the entire time and thinking something completely different? How do I get, how does this one get something over that one, and how does that one get something over this one? And you write one complete story where, they're trying to figure out who's holding what cards at poker, or, they're at a little junk market where somebody's trying to sell them a crazy lamp, and the other person doesn't want to pay full price for it. But the second person is doing the math. So the person says, so first person says, how much is this lamp? Second person says it's $20. And we go back to the first person who's, out loud, but in their thought bubble it says, I can't afford $20. I got $15 on me. Right? Thought bubble. Because now it becomes raised stakes in our storytelling. So that he says, would you take less than 20? And the person says, how much less are we talking about? And he says, 12. And he says in his thought bubble, I'm saying 12 because I can go up as high as 15, and he might not settle for 12. He says, I'm not going as low as 12, right? Maybe we can get 15 out of this guy. There's this complete internal dialogue going on between two people. They're having external dialogue that doesn't entirely meet the same thing. That's fun. Some would say the content in thought bubbles is subtext that you shouldn't have to spell out if you're a good writer. It should come through in the other elements of storytelling. I disagree. I disagree entirely. I don't know who the some are, but I don't agree. Because if you look at a story as textual element, visual element, and the composition overlaid between the two. So now that tertiary element, that third part is words and pictures together, and here's our story, right? And you're adding in an additional complexity of two characters that are trying to grift one another, but we get that extra enticement of what the grift is, despite the difference in their actions. Then it's the difference between watching something written by David Mamet, like Heist, or what's another one I just watched? I watched Trojan recently with him, with Val Kilmer. Watching something that's got all kinds of additional character complexity in it, and then in language complexity, so that's a whole different kettle of fish than if you're watching, I don't know, a Marvel movie where a person says, I gotta stop the bad guy, shoots at the bad guy. If you have the same character goes, I gotta stop the bad guy, but maybe he's right. Maybe he is right. Should I really be stopping him or not? I don't know. I'm not sure. Thought bubble, thought bubble. And the person goes, you're going to try to stop me? He goes, I have to. Okay, now that our protagonist is more complex because they're debating the situation and they're not being so tableau as they just debate it out loud. Nobody walks into a room and expresses all their thoughts. And, why not add that extra factor? So no, I don't agree. It's content, subtext is still applied. Subtext is still there. But if, as the reader, you're already an omniscient participant to a story, you're the person who gets to oversee and look in from the distance. So why not have one additional thing where you can see, the thoughts of your character and how they don't necessarily follow through with their actions? That's great. That's great. There's nothing better than having a character that, presupposes that they're this noble, upright, strong individual who's going to save the day, and at the same time is absolutely insecure. But we only see the momentary absolute insecurity when the moment they're out of the limelight, they're like, oh man, I can't believe I just got through that. That was awful. But when we see the panel, the same story beats where they're standing there in the limelight and they're absolutely the person who's this, and I'm so confident in all these things, but we listen to the narrative inside their head that has, what is that? What's that called? The complex that people have where they don't think they're good enough? Imposter syndrome. I think it's called imposter syndrome. And so as they're standing there in front of everybody, and these bright lights sure are hot, but they're sweating because they're suffering from imposter syndrome and they're wrestling with that narrative in their head. All right, that's it. Let's take a break there and go ahead and have a moment in the green room, sir. And he goes back in the green room and is like, oh. So now we don't have to have him do this overlapping conversation, possibly out loud, that says, oh, I can't believe I got through that. I hope nobody thinks I'm a fake. No, now we get to go for the whole exasperative moment of, oh, like this, and we know why. That's not lazy. That's not sloppy subtext. That's building up. And the idea that you've built it up to the point that when the character goes, oh, then the reader probably goes, yeah, I hear you. I have those moments. Oh, boy, that guy's having that would be rough, And now you've got your reader more invested. So, yeah. I don't know. Hard, fast rules are rough. Hard, fast rules and limitations. Limitations are important in times and places. It's important that if you go and buy every color of paint under the rainbow when you're going to do a painting, enjoy having the moment of going, oh, gosh, which colors do I use? Whereas if you start from a more simplified palette of, let's say, a dozen colors or something like that, and then you got to figure out how to work those combinations together, and you got to figure out blending, and you got to figure out how the balance of the colors work together in the composition. You become more engaged in the active process. Whereas if you've got everything, I need a pink, but not too rosy a pink. I want to just, okay, here's that tube for that little tiny bit, and then it goes back on the shelf. Wait for the next time that you may possibly use rosy pink. you know, I like the whole idea of kitchen sink and everything but the kitchen sink, because that's fun. That lets you unshackle yourself, remove the constraint of possibly writing a story called The Megalomaniacal Spider-Man, where Peter Parker is an objectivist, just like the creator of Peter Parker was. There's subtext. You know? Oh, I don't know if Gwen Stacy seems so nice, but at the same time, there's a young girl next door, Mary Jane. She seems very, very kind, and oh, I'm not sure, but is it up to me to decide between one or the other of them, or should it just allow nature to take its course? Fantastic neuroses. It's so crazy. I can't recommend that book enough. If you get a chance, the Megalomaniacal Spider-Man by Peter Bagby. Yeah. So and so thank you, Marsh. I fully thank you for the conversation on that, because again, this, like I say, there's even these things that I say aren't hard, fast rules. There's perspectives, right? But having a marketplace say that this is the only perspective we have is limiting. Having a general consensus of people that this is the way it should be doesn't allow us to have our Bernie Kriegsteins, or our Jack Kirbys, or our Bill Sienkiewicz, or our Dave McKeons to show up, or George Pratt, or Kent Williams, or all these other, Brendan Graham, contemporary guy, Mike Mignola, all these other individual voices to come out that have different approaches to it. And James Herron and a lot of the stuff that's similar to his that's been coming out now. I mean, there's just so many possibilities, and those possibilities keep it fresh and lively. There's an artist, it's not Riso, I can't remember his name. There was a 12-issue series of Legion of Superheroes written by Bendis and illustrated by Ryan Sook. Oh, I know what it is. And then there was a 2-issue follow-up to it in conjunction with a summer event, again written by Bendis, but Riley Rossmo did the art. And the people that loved Ryan Sook's work hated Riley Rossmo's work because it was so far out in the other direction. And yet at the same time, I was enthralled. I found it enthusiastically fantastic and charming, the way that he came at it from his own vantage point, and I loved it. Have I read a lot of Riley Rossmo's books? No, but I just found what a compelling different take. And, broke all the rules that Ryan Sook had rigid. Every one of them, different approach, different perspective, different way of putting it together. And strangely enough, the story writing changed too. So what had been going on in this previous 12 issues was completely thrown aside for less of the group dynamic and more of the singular characters, or smaller amount of character dynamic. And the two issues far more successful than the previous 12. Strange, but that's because of a change of form. Appreciate your thoughts on this. Really interesting. I've often enjoyed the use of thought bubbles, specifically Spider-Man comics. Oh yeah. Liz says, we have a comic book store here. Never went in. Going to have to check it out. Yes, you would be amazed what there is. Just to walk into a comic book store and realize that they may have adaptations of the Odyssey, or Homer's Iliad, or Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, or Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, but with zombies. So the idea of just getting people in, wearing their undergarments on the outside, punching each other in contrived situations, isn't the only thing you're going to find in comic book stores. You're going to find things for all ages these days. You're going to find classics, classic pieces of literature. You're going to have, fantastic dystopian assessments on reality, and Department of Truth, and the subversive government, conspiracies, and you're going to have, the X-Files as a comic book, or all this range of madness that's all open to interpretation. They've adapted 1984. They've adapted Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. They've adapted Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. You know, there's comic books about the life story of David Bowie, Rush, Tori Amos. Comic books are no longer things that are just, not that they ever really truly were just for kids, but now comics are far more broad and wide-ranging. And it's about time. It's about time. But it's been a long process in North American comics to get here. And it's only really, in the last 100 years, I would suggest that probably 50 of those have been with the doors open, but nobody realizes yet. So, just to think about the possibilities is fun in and of itself. Who knows what you're gonna find. If you like Pride and Prejudice, try Pride and Prejudice with zombies. It's still Pride and Prejudice, but there's zombies in that world. Oh, Mr. Darcy, tell me of your parents. Well, yeah. So, okay. All right, folks. I don't know if this is. I appreciate everybody chatting and the engagement, and we all have ways that we look at things, and way that we see things, and way that we apply ourselves to things. If you have a basic idea of the simple rules of a thing, that opens the doors to you making the new rules. That opens the doors to you discovering the undiscovered country. For you finding the applications that other people might not have considered, because you're coming into this doing comics as magazine collages. You're coming into this telling your story with nothing but repetitive panels of dots, the text above them, and it represents the Napoleonic Wars. You're coming into this from the outside, where you've got a whole, fresh, fantastic viewpoint. That's what any industry needs. That's how we progress. That's how we move forward. And people are hungry for it, but how are they going to know until it happens? Right? So, I've been accused of having an offbeat humor forever. You came to the right place. Okay, let's see. Well, here's a challenging one. Hey, Marsh, you're here. Conspiracy Kitty, who has a deep, sultry voice, will be the page that I will post tomorrow. And that suggestion comes from Marsh Makes Comics. Thanks so much for that, Marshall Lee. Listen, if there's people that you've noticed taking part in the chat, and if there's people that whose comments that you see, take a look at what they're working on. There's illuminating things that we can all gain from looking at what each other do, and how each other express ideas. So yeah, take a look at what each other are doing, and thank you everybody for coming by. I really appreciate it very much, and thank you very much to Linda, the moderator with the mostest. And I'll be back tomorrow at 2 p.m. EST. So whatever time that is for wherever you are, please feel free to come on out. If you got a suggestion for a one-page story, throw it at me in the comments for this video, or in the comments in any of the social media posts that I do on Patreon, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to help out, you can help out on the Patreon. But yeah, thanks very much, everybody. I hope everyone has a great day. Go make something. Go break the rules of whatever it is you're making. Have fun. All right, bye for now. See you tomorrow.